I want to talk about two books, or is it one book split in two? They're comic books, actually. So this is Boxers and Saints. It's a paired story where on one volume you have the story of this young man who's involved in a rebellion against the European invaders, and the other one is the story of this young girl who actually becomes a Christian. They are not books about Tai Chi, but they are a great way to get a sense of the times when Tai Chi essentially emerged. So if you want, it's a fantastic read, great story, really interesting. It gives context for Tai Chi. It gives you an idea of the world that Tai Chi came from, an idea of the mindset of the people who basically practice Tai Chi, develop Tai Chi, and all of that. It's a wonderful entry into that world. It's a great story, first of all, so it's a great read. So it's not exactly difficult homework. But anybody who does Tai Chi will see, especially in the story of the young man who, in Boxers, though you should read both because they actually interconnect. But you see where the spiritual aspect of martial art comes in, like, directly. It's not like the separate thing where it's like, oh, you do martial art on this side and then you do your spiritual practice on this other side. They are commingled. They work together. It also shows how these martial art techniques would spread from village to village as you'd have people traveling back and forth. You see how the world of imperial China was very different from the world of rural China. They were very essentially separate worlds where you would only meet, an imperial representative when you paid your taxes or if there was an army coming through, and that's basically it. And that's an important point because the story of Tai Chi is always that it went from Chen village through Yangluchan into the capital, and that's a huge transition. And you see it here with in the stores how there's an entire world that exists apart from the imperial seat, in the capital, and then that's the world that birthed Tai Chi. And so that, again, it's what needs to be kept in the back of your head as you do Tai Chi. Or if you're interested in like understanding and knowing more about Tai Chi, that's a really important context to understand and to see where it comes from and how it was brought about and how it was transmitted. So they're really wonderful stories. I mean, Gene Luen Yang is the author. So Boxers and Saints, it's uncompromising. You see also in Saints the reason why a young woman would become a Christian, and that actually in many ways Christianity was a way to get out of a very patriarchal society. But of course there's also there's other downsides to that, but so it really kind of forces you to address some of the issues that are inherent in Chinese culture, because we don't, as much as we can be interested in Chinese culture and Chinese history and Chinese martial arts and all of these kind of Taoist internal exercises that we do, we also have to be kind of clear-eyed about the fact that not everything about Chinese culture and was wonderful, and there were definitely some deficiencies, and one of the major ones was the way that it treated women. And it's in both of these tomes, women's participation is addressed. There's actually And there's a really interesting thread there where there's a real paranoia about yin and yin power and women's power. That's kind of fascinating because in American Tai Chi these days, everything is about softness. Like, oh, you can't use force. You can't use, everything has to be soft. And it's interesting to see how actually it was the complete reverse culturally for these Chinese martial artists, and that there was a fear of that kind of yin energy. It's quite interesting, and it makes you kind of go, oh, wait a minute, what happened here? How did we get to the point where Tai Chi is seen as pure yin and soft and feminine, when the roots of it were actually quite the opposite? So there's an interesting contradiction that you have to kind of start thinking about and bring to the foreground and reconcile with in your own practice as you do Tai Chi. So in that sense, it's really interesting. There's also, it addresses the idea of martial art as a spiritual practice, and it's not the kind of spiritual practice that you think. Again, it's because we've been mostly exposed to philosophical Taoism, Tao Te Ching, all that, meditation. So our idea of it is of, the Taoist saints, essentially, the sages, the people who go out into the mountains and sit for, all day. And there's this other side of the Taoism and kind of Chinese culture, which has much more to do with spirits. And these were considered to be a reality. And any martial practice was, in a way, an invocation of the spirits of either past heroes, so literally you're invoking the dead, or of gods and spirits. And that's something I think that we really don't take into consideration. We kind of avoid. It's very much not in kind of our Western mindset. But that's the reality, is that's the way that somebody doing Tai Chi at the time, or proto Tai Chi, the internal martial arts, derived out of these kind of Taoist ideas, that's what they would be doing, is that they would be training for the martial art. So there would be and it's shown in the book, actually. There's sequences of people training how to become martial artists, how to use weapons and swords. But then there is this whole other aspect of spiritual involvement. The spirits are called upon to essentially inhabit the martial artists, to inhabit the fighters. And that's a very Chinese thing. It's a very much part of all of these Taoist rituals. It's very much part of the idea of performance within martial arts. That's pretty fascinating, I think. It's very much eye-opening when you start thinking about it, that basically you're doing a ritual that in the end, if you want to use it in terms of self-defense, you've invoked a spirit to come and help you in fighting. That's pretty wild. So, and it's... of course, it's not an instructional manual on how to do it, but it does bring, again, this kind of richness to the performance. It's richness to the tradition, that Tai Chi is something. It's not just a set of movements that you just do nice and slow, and it's gentle and it's nice for you, and you feel more relaxed about it. There's the tradition that it comes from is so ancient and rich and potent and interesting and fun, frankly, that it just adds to the Tai Chi. Suddenly Tai Chi can be so much more. And this is very, very much illustrated in these two books. They are sad. It's not a happy story. It's not a happy part of Chinese history. Which is also something that needs to be known and kind of really taken in. It's like the purpose of Tai Chi, when it emerged, the time period that it emerged, it was time in China when things were bad. Not just in terms of, physically bad. It's not just, there's warfare and things like that. It's warfare, it's civil war, but it's also a social and psychological attack on kind of the Chinese body, essentially, on the Chinese people, on their beliefs. It's about the fact that Western powers came in, defeated the imperial armies, brought in their new religion, which essentially defeated traditional Chinese religions, and their reaction to that. And Tai Chi is part of that. Tai Chi is part of that history. It emerges at this point. There's a reason why I think Tai Chi was recognized and named Tai Chi, right? It's very much to anchor it in this kind of Taoist tradition, which means Chinese tradition, recognized as a martial art. And it was a way of saying, look, here's an example of Chinese prowess, of Chinese strength, right? Through Tai Chi. Saying this is pure Tai Chi. This is not, the Western savages coming with their guns. This is pure Tai Chi. It's based in Taoism. It's a martial art. It's strength. It's power. And it's connected to our history. There's nothing more Chinese essentially than Tai Chi Chuan in that sense. And that's part of the history. And I think it's this kind of things that need to be recognized and need to be not acted upon. There's nothing to do about it, but to know that it's an expression of it's not national pride, of historical pride in that sense. It's saying these are the fundamental ideas that define us, expressed through a martial art. That's heavy stuff. And whether you're Chinese or not, in a way it doesn't matter, but it's like there's values, there are ideas embedded in the practice of Tai Chi. It's good to know what these are. And so these books, again, these two books are a great way to dive into that. All right. Boxers and Saints. Gene Luen Yang, the author. Very good, and it will give you a sense of all of that. And just start kind of opening a few doors to start kind of thinking about Tai Chi in a slightly different way. Again, you will learn nothing about Tai Chi practice or exercises or anything like that. They're not books about Tai Chi, but anybody who does Tai Chi should read them to have a better sense of the cultural context that Tai Chi comes from. That's it.